It's a little after 8, and I'd like to introduce you to former state senator Gerald Winegrad, who has a lifelong fascination with wildlife. His first job out of law school in 1969 was with the National Wildlife Federation, and one of his last jobs before retiring was with the American Bird Conservancy, leading a national effort to conserve avian species. Also, he taught graduate courses at the University of Maryland on wildlife management and Chesapeake Bay restoration. He still writes a weekly environmental column in the Capital newspaper. He was vice president of the Anne Arundel Bird Club for 9 years and leading bird trips as well. Our bird club vice president is 2 years and then 2 years president. So it's a long time being vice president. His wife, Carol Swan, is an avid photographer with an interest in capturing images on wildlife and their natural habitats. She's made a photo book for each of the many eco-travel trips they have taken, including African safaris, the Brazilian and Peruvian Amazon, the Andes, the Galapagos Islands, Midway Atoll National Wildlife Refuge, Madagascar, as well as Svalbard. So I've been looking forward to this presentation for a very long time. An expedition to the kingdom of the ice bear, the Norwegian Arctic. Thank you very much.
You have it up now?
Yeah, just before you get started, if you haven't muted your microphone and turn off your video, please do so.
So are we ready now?
Yes, take it away. Thank you.
Okay, sorry for the glitch. So back in August of 2019, Carol and I made our trip to the high Arctic in Svalbard. And so on the left, you can see part of the 200,000 breeding black-legged kittiwakes pairs that are in Svalbard. And on the right is one of the polar bears that wanders the ice as well as the islands that make up Svalbard. So where is Svalbard? So it's an archipelago. It's right here on the screen. And it is 1,270 miles north of Oslo, the capital of Norway. Norway's here, you'll see where Oslo is. And it's 3,619 miles to Longyearbyen, which is the only real, quote, town, if you'll call it that, a village in Svalbard. So here's Greenland, here's Iceland. Iceland barely touches the Arctic Circle. And this is Novaya Zemlya off of Russia, and Franz Josef Land, which is Russia here, and the North Pole is here. There's about 2,700 residents. All of them, about almost 2,300, are in the one town of Longyearbyen, where your trip is based out of by ship. You can see there's 3,000 polar bears and 2,000 walruses and 2,700 residents. And Svalbard, it's for this northern reach, is about 500 miles of the North Pole. It isn't a place like Costa Rica or Brazil or Ecuador or Colombia for seeing a lot of species. It's not tropical climate, obviously, it's very cold. And there's 214 avian species been recorded. There's 46 commonly breeding, with about another 9 that have sporadically bred there. The only one brave wintering land bird is the rock ptarmigan, which is also one of the few that are allowed to be hunted there. And so many of the other species leave during the after the midnight sun goes down and it turns into darkness for a long period of time, which you'll see in Svalbard. They disappear, they go south. So another picture of it is, here's the archipelago of Svalbard. It's also called Spitsbergen, which can be confusing because the main island here, all of this, of the 9 major islands, the major land masses, used to be called Spitsbergen, and it's now called Longyearbyen. And so the Arctic Circle is here. Here's Oslo down here. So it's 1,270 more miles up to get up to here. So it's equal with northern Greenland. It's said to be Longyearbyen, most major little village that's this far north. And this is Franz Josef Land again, Novaya Zemlya. And some of the birds and the walruses and the polar bears, they move around in this area. So the Greenland Sea is right here. You know, it's part of the Arctic Ocean up here. The Barents Sea is over here. And so it makes us to be, you know, down here, they call it the Norwegian Sea off of Norway. It gets a little confusing where you are, but there is the Arctic Ocean here too. Here, and again, here's Iceland, which barely touches the Arctic Circle. So there's 5 major islands there, and we've visited them all. So again, this is Spitsbergen, the main island, and you get around, this is Nordøstlandet, which is really wild. And then you go through the Hinlopen Strait, which we did, and you get to 2 islands. One, the northern one is Edgeoya, and the other one is Barentsoya. All of these are named for Barents, who was Wilhelm Barents, who in 1596 led an expedition, his third, up to the Arctic to try to find a water route to China for trade. He was Flemish, or you might call him Dutch Belgian back then, and that's the names of all of these places are named after him. Barentsoya, Oya, and Norwegian means island. And so Wilhelm Barents, there's a new book out that came out last year. A woman spent 5 years researching. They found a diary from when they got caught in the ice. They were not wise to stay up there during the winter, and their vessel got wrecked, and they somehow made their way to Novaya Zemlya and set up camp, and 5 of them died, including Barents, in the winter of 1597. And they found the diary many, many years later. It was preserved, and she based that on that diary, and it's an excellent book. And it just came out last year on what they did to survive, with polar bears after them, and what they had to kill and to just get by for that time. The crew to tell the tale of what happened to them when they got back to Holland. So you can see the countries. Norway is here, and Norway actually touches Russia. There's Murmansk, Russia. And one of the interesting things amongst many about this place is that the Russians are everywhere here. I mean, I'm not saying this because of Ukraine, but these countries really fear the Russians. And the Murmansk is the base of this Russian, the only one in the world, nuclear icebreaker. And to make money during the summer months, for $25,000 a person, you can go from Murmansk, and this icebreaker is capable of bracing ice all the way to the North Pole. And you have to remember how long humans struggled, Amundsen, the Norwegian, and Americans, to try to get to the North Pole. And you can go there. It takes 7 days up, 7 days back. And I talked to some people that went, a Chinese guy that led a trip with Chinese at 25,000 a crack, said they did nothing. The crew did nothing. It wasn't like you were birding or looking for walrus, polar bears, whales. You went up, you went back, you stopped for an hour. They had a barbecue at the North Pole. You put your country's flag in the ice, and then you went back for 7 days. So if any of you are interested in that trip, I'll give you information. We certainly weren't. So when we flew by way of Frankfurt into Oslo, we got there at 3 a.m. our time, or 9 o'clock their time in the morning, and I had made arrangements through the BirdLife International partner in Norway. And Håkon is the leader of the club, and his partner Hans Paul, who is works with them in their, if you would call it, their local bird club that covered the whole greater Oslo area, which is over 1 million of the 5.4 million people in Norway. And they took us out birding and seeing the sights around Oslo. So it was pretty cool because you could get some live birds while we were waiting for our 10:30 flight, jet flight up to Longyearbyen. This was one of the nice wetlands that we visited. And this is their symbol of their Norwegian chapter of BirdLife International. I don't know whether you can see this in the camera, but that's the patch that they have. And that's the Great-crested Grebe. And we were really lucky to get that bird. It's my wife's photo. And this is the Eurasian Coot. And this is the one I wanted to see too, the barnacle goose, which has a very interesting story. And I always wondered, why is it called a barnacle goose? What's it have to do with barnacles? And the story is that people never saw where these birds went in the summer months. They'd winter, they could see them in Europe clearly and in other areas. And they theorized somehow that this bird was actually found from early self-called naturalists. They actually wrote about having witnessed these geese, this goose species, actually being spawned from goose barnacles, which is a type of barnacle, and that they said back in the 1100s that this individual said that they were hung from fir timber, F-I-R, fir timber in the sea, and they lived off the gum that it produced, and they were surrounded by these barnacle shells from the goose barnacle, and they broke out fully clothed with a strong coat of feathers. And the reporter states he has seen more than 1,000 of these small bodies of birds with his own eyes hanging down on the sea. And this persisted, believe it or not, for centuries. And here's an actual drawing from a naturalist book from 1552 with the goose barnacles spawning out the barnacle geese. So it wasn't until the explorers could get up into the Arctic that they actually dispelled the myth of the barnacle goose. And this is a Graylag goose, which was a life bird for me too, a very, very handsome dude here, I would say. And this is a tufted duck, which sometimes is a frequent accidental here in the country. This is a scene from a hill where there's an ancient fort looking at part of the port of Oslo, which is their center of economic activity. Norway is mostly a rural country with many fjords, rivers, lakes, streams, mountains, but it is also an economic giant for its size of 5.4 million people. In fact, it is one of the largest producers of gas in the North Sea, and it has fantastic reserves. It is one of the major exporters of oil and gas in the world. It's number 3 in oil and number 8 natural gas. In fact, three in natural gas and 8 in oil. It has a sovereign wealth fund for only 5.4 million people of over $1 trillion where this money is stored. It also has a highly socialized economy where the income tax is 38% with no exceptions. It used to be 46%. And the value-added tax, like the sales tax, is on most goods. There's some exceptions, but there are most goods, and it's 25%. So if you wanted to buy a pair of binoculars, or you wanted to buy a bottle of wine or 6-pack of beer or whatever, or a new piece of furniture, there's a 25% value-added tax on it. Hotels, etc., the whole panoply. But healthcare is strong and free. Schools, including college, graduate school, professional schools, are free, and the benefits for the elderly are extremely good, where they take care of people. And Norway was rated the people with #1 happiest people. That's despite Oslo being the 2nd most expensive city next to Tokyo. And Norway also has a very quick interesting history that I'll talk about Svalbard, and that Norway was occupied by the Germans in almost to the date in April of 1940. It was a key area for Hitler to guard the North Sea and Germany and base his submarines and ships, battleships. At the time, there were 3 million Norwegians and 400,000 Nazi troops were in there, with over 1,000 different kind of camps for prisoners of war and slave labor camps. And 10,000 people died at the hands of the Nazis there. The government had stayed neutral in World War I, tried to in World War II. The British got there too late. There were battles. The king fled with his son, wife, grandchildren to England, and then they sent the wife, the Crown Princess Martha, to the United States, and it was an excellent series. It's not all accurate, of her friendship with Franklin D. Roosevelt. He found him a place in Northern Virginia, and it's called Atlantic Crossing. If you haven't seen it, you can get it on public television or Amazon Prime, but it's an excellent series on what happened. And right now, the king, it's a constitutional monarchy, is King Harold, Harald, which goes back to Viking times, from Harold united the kingdoms, the warring kingdoms, to form the Viking Empire, based in Norway. And that he is the grandson of the king that was present during World War II. So this is the museum of the resistance, and it's an ancient fort. You know how we're excited in America that something goes back to 1600. Well, this fort was built way back in the 1200s, and it's where the king used to live, or the prime minister and the king before them, because it was a high point and a very safe bastion from warring factions. Norway, through the years, of course, there were the Vikings. Then they were also part of Denmark. They were like, it was a joint thing where the two countries were, the Danes dominated after the Vikings went out in around the 1100s. And then they sided with the wrong side in the Napoleonic Wars. When they lost, they were merged with Sweden. Sweden took them over, but they were allowed to keep their own constitution, which still is in being now. It's based on the United States and the French constitutions. So they're now, in 1905, they got their total independence, and they became, it's a constitutional monarchy with a parliament that rules with the king still there. And this is Håkon, who's named after a famous Viking as well, leader. And we're on a boat ride of about 200 yards to get to a little island. It's a sailing club, and they make their money with a very nice lunch spot where you're sitting right on the sound, on the fjord that Oslo is based. And this is his partner, Esther, who's from Estonia and very worried about the Russians. And this is before the Ukraine too. You can see the Great-crested Grebe right here, the Great-crested Grebe that's their symbol. And we were bird watching as we were here. And in return for them hosting us for a day, a long day of visiting, and the other gentleman that you saw birding with me, his father was part of the resistance in World War II. So the museum meant a lot, but it was all in Norwegian. I couldn't understand much. They had to interpret. So I did a presentation to the bird club there, like I'm doing now, but this was on our different laws, the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, and all the Endangered Species Act, all the laws protecting birds and the relevant, and the issues like tower kills, wind turbines, and also the longline fisheries that Norway engages in. And so I said to them when we had the dinner, let us help pay, because it was extremely expensive. And he said, no, this is on me, but you better be good tonight in front of my group. So anyway, there's a little pressure. And you know how with bird club meetings, when you had in-person ones like ours, we'd always had cookies, desserts, some fruit or something. Well, there in the Norwegian countries, it's waffles. That's what you have with jellies and stuff. And so they have waffles serving with a hot waffle iron, which is traditional. So we had a great day with them before we flew up. The plane was late, so we didn't get up there until early in the morning. And this is the fjord as you come into Svalbard, as we, way up north. And this is one of their only shopping areas in this little town. Longyear used to be all part of the town. We used to be a coal mining area. And there was a guy named John Longyear. He was from Boston. And in the early days of ships being able to get up in the Arctic, it became quite a thing for the wealthy to be able to take a summer cruise up there in these wooden vessels. And so in the 1890s, he went up with his family, and they went to the village there and Spitsbergen, and he liked it. And the coal company was foundering, and I'll explain a lot of this, but coal was one of the minerals that they really found they could exploit. So there were a number of coal mining villages up there with people that were exporting coal. And Longyearbyen, he took over the coal mining industry. And then they named the town Longyearbyen. BNBYEN means a village in Norwegian. And so this is just a mock-up of one of the areas there. And so they're still mining coal. It's coal mine number 7. The rest of them have petered out. And it's still, even though they're very strict environmentally, I should add that even though Norway is very, very wealthy with its oil and gas, it has almost 100% of electrical energy, unlike us, is produced by renewable resources. Most of that 80% is produced from hydro, because they have so many flowing rivers and the deep fjords. And so they produce 92%, but another 6.4 is from wind, and then the rest is from thermal. So it's just about 100% renewable. And despite the presence of so much oil, they deliberately have extremely high taxes on gas. And in terms of our dollars, right now it's the second highest in the world at $6.27 a gallon. People are freaking out here because it was 4 something. They're paying $6.27. So guess what? They ride bikes, they commute on rail and buses, they walk, and 90% of the vehicles sold in the last year were either 100% electric or they were hybrids. Many of them plug in with electric capacity. And they have a goal that's real by 2025 to have 100% of the fleet of cars being electric plug-ins, because when you plug in there, unlike here, you're not getting any coal, you're not burning any natural gas. So this is one of the mountains, and this is, remember, this is in August. And what they say is that when it gets cold and they have more snow, that this connects, and it's a champagne glass, and that's when the libations begin, when the long winter comes. So in Longyearbyen, if you go further north, it's worse. In Longyearbyen, the winter, the polar winter, with no sunlight at all, there is no sunrise, no sunset, lasts from 26 October to 15 February. That's a long time. But the midnight sun lasts for 99 days from 20 April until 23 August. So we were there and never saw sunset, never saw sunrise. The sun was up constantly. So for all of you birding enthusiasts and wildlife enthusiasts, imagine what it's like being at sea with all these seabirds, with seals, with whales, with polar bears, with walrus potential. And you have to go to sleep, even though it's bright sunlight, and you can go anywhere on the vessel, the stern, the bow, and when the captain allows you, you can go up on the bridge, or you can look out your window. So they have really thick shields that you pull down, not just, I wouldn't just say it's a curtain, but it's like a shield you pull down, quiets as well as blocks the sunlight. And if you didn't do that, you'd be up. Somebody, I really wanted to see a walrus, told me he saw a walrus. I said, where did you see it? And he told me, I said, what time? He says, it was 3 a.m. So I missed it. I was sleeping in my cabin. So we went, this is the sound where Longyearbyen is with the sailboat. You don't see many pleasure boats up there. It's a wild country. If something happens, you're a long way from any help. And on the left, well, on the right, I'll tell you, this was Hilda. She's Norwegian. She's about 6'3". And this is a monument to the people that fought World War II, because the Nazis, believe it or not, they strafed and shelled these little villages and blew up the coal mining activities up in Svalbard. There was a resistance, and there was a Nazi plane that was shot down, and I actually saw parts of it still there. They haven't cleaned it up deliberately. And this is a monument to those folks that fought against the Germans. In fact, the last German to surrender was after the war ended in Germany, and the word didn't get there. There was a remote weather station on the northern tip of Nord-Oslo, way up. And it was a weather station, but probably a spy station for the Germans too, way up north on the island, one of the islands on North Oslo. And they were finally notified that the war was over. And so they finally got to go home well after the war ended. I hired somebody, but she worked for the coal company. I said, I want somebody who knows birds. She didn't know the birds as well as I did. And it was my first trip where I was seeing lifers. And so we spent, while we're waiting for the vessel, even though we retired, we spent about 4 hours touring with her. And these are actually seals. They are allowed to hunt seals. These are probably harbor seals. And this is how they used to catch polar bears, which they harvested for the pelts, the hides, as well as eat the meat. And they would build this little teepee-like structure, hang a real seal up here, and they would have a bell on this. When the polar bear reached up to get the seal, they eat the seal, they would hear the bell and they would shoot the polar bear. Now they use seals to feed the sled dogs because there are roads there, but they go to nowhere. They go to the coal mining thing and they don't go anywhere else. And so you get around, particularly in winter, either by snowmobile or skis, cross-country skis, or you use dog sleds. And so this is what it looks like. This is a weather station, and there's a lot of research that's being done, Arctic research, and Hilda's taken me down to where the plain was, parts of the plain. And you can see how wild this is. And this is Arctic cotton that's growing here. There's an amazing variety of plant life despite the harsh conditions. And 60% of the Svalbard Archipelago is covered in ice, either glaciers or what are called ice caps, which are even thicker and on top of the land mass. And 30% is rock, either mountains like you see here, gravel, and then the other 10% is vegetation. So the tundra and some of the plants that grow. There's actually 180 different, what we would classify as advanced plants with stalks. The housing is built on top of the permafrost, so it's no foundations, it's built up. The 2,700 people are there. There's a branch of the University of Norway for marine studies where students spend a year. There's also scientific research done. They have to administer the island. They have an individual that's called the Sysselman, who's like a governor in a way. He's not elected. He's appointed by the king, but technically through the parliament. And they serve 3-year terms. And you can see all of the snowmobiles here. And the Sysselman is in charge of the administration of all of the Svalbard Archipelago. So Spitsbergen got its name, Spitsbergen, from the Dutchman Willem Barents, when he saw these jagged peaks that were really pointed, and Spitsbergen means jagged peaks, pointed peaks. And so when Norway became totally independent from Sweden in 1905, a sense of national pride went back to a term they believe originated with the Vikings, Svalbard, which meant edge of the ice. So the Vikings came from the Norsemen, Norway, Denmark, Sweden, and they went west. So they first took over Iceland, and then they moved to Greenland. And then, of course, Eric the Red's son, Leif Erikson, Eric the Red was the one that went from Iceland to Greenland. His son, Leif Erikson, is the one that really, other than Native Americans, is the one that discovered the European discovery of America when he was in Newfoundland in about 1000 AD. All of the things we learned in our history books are totally wrong. Columbus did not discover. Of course, Native Americans were here for 15,000 years, at least in our country. What is our country now? And of course, Leif Erikson, there's substantial evidence that he was there. And so when they changed that name, Spitsbergen still applies to the major island where Longyearbyen is. And that is the largest island by far of the many islands that make up Svalbard, but it's now called Svalbard. Some people still call it Spitsbergen. Just one of the many scenes. And this is tourism at its best or worst, because dogs usually are pulling these sleds in snow and ice, but because they won't go on a road, they have wheels that they put on this. And this woman pays the guide who keeps the dogs. And if you'll see this is a high-powered rifle. One of the good parts is that they're polar bears, and you're going to find them if you go on this trip. And the polar bears reign. This is the kingdom of the ice bear. And in Longyearbyen, they can come into town. And while we were out on the ship for 11 days, in fact, one came into town, and the Seiselmen, they tried to scare it off with fireworks and firecrackers. And finally, they got a helicopter on the Seiselmen, and they chased the polar bear back out of town. And so wherever you go, if you camp, if you go on a trip on the Zodiac and you do landings like we did, or if you're on a dog sled, or you're a teacher with students and you're out on foot or like this, you have to have a high-powered rifle just in case. It'd be a major, major investigation if you ever shot a polar bear there. They've been totally protected after they were extirpated since 1963. They were hunted almost to extinction. And so everywhere you go, I don't care whether you're a teacher, whether you're a biologist, you'll see this later from our trip, you've got to have the high-powered rifle just because of the potential danger. The polar bear is, if he's on land, or she is, they're hungry, and you're just meat on a stick. So these are some of the female king eiders. I really wanted to see the males. They were all gone, and then they changed their phase. So that was a life bird for me. They were right around us in the water. These are barnacle geese. I think they're really handsome. There they up just feeding. They were all over on the sides of the roads, all over. And this is in the little village of Longyearbyen. And these are red-throated loons. In Europe, they call them divers. They don't call them loons. So these are red-throated loons that we even saw all around Svalbard. And this is the Arctic tern, one of the longest migrating animals on the planet, way up in Svalbard, and where they nest. The Arctic tern, there's about 10,000 breeding pairs in Svalbard, and where there's terns, there's the chicks, and where there's chicks, there's the predators. And these Arctic, they call them skuas, S-K-U-A. We call them the parasitic Jaeger. And so they, you can see the feathers. They've been at it. If they can grab an adult, they will, but they definitely predate on the chicks of the Arctic tern. Arctic fox, when they're starting to turn all white because it was August, but in the summer, they will be mostly gray to blend in with the rocks as they hunt. And there's 3 land mammals in all of the archipelago of Svalbard, which, as I pointed out, is about as big as the state of West Virginia. 3 mammals. So there's the Arctic fox. Polar bear is not a land mammal, it is a marine mammal. The other one is the Svalbard reindeer, which of course is also known as a caribou. And unlike our caribou, it is much bulkier. It's got thicker fur. It's just really different looking. It is not as long-legged and as supple as you would think. He's got the weather that winter. So this is a male that we took a picture of right in Longyearbyen, but we saw him in other areas of Svalbard. And the third one is a sibling vole, which we didn't get to see. We looked for it. That is those are the only 3 land mammals in all of Svalbard. This was probably introduced from a ship so many years, maybe 100 years ago, that it's considered naturalized now. This is our ship, the motor vessel Hondius, and Hondius was a Flemish cartographer. We also painted pictures of Sir Francis Drake, and he was about 1600. And so they named the ship. This was built in Croatia in 2018. We went on it on its second voyage. It's very seaworthy. It's polar class 6, the highest rating for a civilian ship. It has stabilizers. There was never really any seasickness that I could detect from anybody. It was pretty steady, and we were near inshore waters or in the ice. And great food, great accommodations. There were a couple downsides, and I'll talk about those in a minute, but it was a really nice ship, and it was called Ocean Wide Adventures. ocean-wide expeditions, and I would recommend it to folks that wanted to go up there. So it's kind of their map. It's funny. So the trip that I planned was in August. If you really wanted to see the max number of birds, not be able to get into some places because of the ice still, June is the month. June, you're going to see so many other species of birds and seabirds. It's just much more. But this gave us a lot of birds, not as many as would have been if we went June. It would have been colder. And secondly, we would not been able to do a circumnavigation, which I wanted to do. I wanted to go, the trip was planned with a 70 to 80% chance to go all the way around here and all the way down and around the island. But the ice from the North Pole, unusually they had south winds, and it was blowing the ice down from all the way from the north, so that we could not make the circumnavigation. We had to cut it off and come down to Hinlopen Strait here. So these are the major islands. This is all Spitsbergen, one island. And then this is North Otselet, which is really wild. Most of it's protected as a wildlife preserve. And then down here is the first smaller island is Edgioya. And then the bigger one is, Barentsoya, named after Barents. And the bigger one is Edgioya. So these 1, 2, 3, 4 make up most of the landmass, the island. All of these are places where we stop. And these are the animals we would have seen. This is the captain, who's Dutch. We got along very well. You can go up on the bridge and look at 180 degrees. It's a great place to spot, and it's not ice cold. Like my wife had a photograph, and we didn't have a balcony, so she had to be out in the cold. And he is a Brit who was in charge of us, in charge of the trip, but he's in charge of the ship, and they coordinate where we can land and where we can't with the Zodiacs. This is the guides who do everything. And these people were from all the continents except Antarctica. And I won't go into the countries, but from the PhD ornithologist woman was from South Africa. Others were from Argentina way down, and others were from England and well, there was one American, and he's the happy guy that is right here. And he was going to get a master's in, study the German language because he thought he would have a niche to do guides and all. Pippa was our favorite. She sat with us a lot. She's from Scotland, and you'll see me later with her. But so there are at least 5 whales that can be seen commonly, although there are as many as 15 that inhabit the waters around Svalbard. What you will find in our nation's history and in the history of European countries is this exploitation under discovery and under science, just like we did to our country with the Native Americans, exploiting them, extirpating them. And this word's being used too much, but there truly was an American-directed genocide, which is another story against our natives. And then we killed the bison, we killed off beavers for most of the places they've come back, et cetera, and exploited this all for profit, first for the King of England, and then for slaveholders. It goes on and on. So what happened in the Arctic also happened in the Antarctic, but later, and that is as soon as Barents went up there, he noted all the whales. So it only took a few years for the whaling people to start coming in. The first slaughter occurred for walruses on an island in 1604, and then it just spread to at one point there were 250 up to 300 whaling vessels with 10,000 whalers up there in the 1600s. By the end of the 1600s, that quick, all of the smaller whales that were easier to harpoon and pull in were killed. Most of them were displaced or killed, or in the shallower waters of the fjords and in the easy to access areas where they could take them to land and process the blubber and oil, because oil was extremely valuable from the whale. And the right whale could have 10,000 tons of oil, and it was slaughtering stations were set up all over. Most of them, people didn't overwinter generally. And so this is a humpback whale, one of 5 species that we saw. We also saw the fin whale, which is the second largest. I did not get to see a blue whale. Look for them in the Galapagos, the largest animal ever to live on Earth. And we also saw the humpbacks one, the minke whale, which Norway is one of the few countries with Japan that still hunts the minke whale. They have 400 or 800 a year. And then also we got to see their extremely rare bowhead whale, which is endangered, and a right whale. It's called the right whale because it had so much oil. So the slaughter was part of it, but they also slaughtered walruses for their hides and their blubbers, 4 inches thick. They boiled them down. They slaughtered seals as well. And the trade was throughout Europe. The walrus hide was used as leather thongs, loading things for ships, ship ropes, and it was all over Europe. This is a northern fulmar, called a tube nose, which are a very common species. In fact, I believe I'm looking on my notes, the numbers for all the birds. There are many, many species in northern fulmars, over 1 million pairs in Svalbard alone. And this is Pippa, who I mentioned, one of the guides. She has a high-powered rifle. So when you do a landing to look for birds, to look for walrus, well, they know when there's walrus, you can see them, but to look at the flora and the fauna, to go over the geology and the formation of the land, and also look for fossils. Before you can land, they have scopes on the bridge and around the ship, and they start looking, the guides and the leader and the captain, to look for polar bears. If they don't see them, they dispatch a Zodiac, which you'll see, with the guides, with rifles, and they will do a 4-point military rectangular landing as high ground they can get to look in the valleys and depressions to see if there's any polar bears. If there's none, they come back into Zodiac, start landing us. And every guide, then 4 of them have to station themselves. So unless you talk to them and go to the corners, you can't get the information as to the wildflowers, the birds. It was one of the downers. Plus, you don't land if there's a polar bear. You get to see them from the vessel or from the Zodiac, but you don't land. And it can be disappointing because it's the only safe thing to do. They do not want, and polar bears, just before we went there the year before, a woman was killed camping, even though all protocols were followed. The bear just went through everything, and they fired up in the air. They didn't kill it, but they had a full report. So Pippa is carrying a rifle, high-powered rifle. They have to be trained in this. It's kind of a drag because it really occupies our guides a lot. So this is the only other, if you would, occupied village. There's one other that I'll mention. There's one other, I'm sorry, there is one other, but Ny Allison just means New Allison. It's a town in Norway, and they named this New. It was the coal mining town. The Germans shelled it and destroyed the coal mining seams and set them on fire during World War II. And then they restarted the coal mining, but in '62, there was an explosion, 1962, and it killed about 18 people. And it was a really scandal in Norway. A new government, a new prime minister actually came in, and that stopped the coal mining. Now it's a research station, and it may have 40 people that live there in research buildings, and there's Chinese, there's Russians. When the Norwegian finally took over Svalbard, it was a no man's land up until 1920, the Treaty of Spitsbergen, and that gave Norway ownership. Part of that is a very unique agreement, and that is that anyone there at the time or had a claim could stay there forever, and that there would be no military present whatsoever. That was because of the fear of the Russians and some of the other nations as well, but Norway wasn't particularly, after the Viking period 1,000 years before, isn't particularly warlike. But they also said no military aircraft, no military station there, and if you had land there, a research station. So the Russians had a place at Barentsburg, which is reachable only by vessel or snowmobile from Longyearbyen. It's further out the sound towards the Greenland Sea. And so the Russians stopped coal mining, but there's still about a couple of hundred people, maybe 300 or 400 people there doing what you can only guess, and it's probably spying. And I said to the one Norwegian guide on our way back, he was very good on the birds and all, who gave us one while we were waiting for a plane to go home, gave us a tour. And I said, you know, there's a Russian weather station there, and the Russians are at the airport because part of the deal when they first brought jets in, because it was all private planes, usually owned by the coal companies, until the 1970s when they put in an international airport, but the Russians were objecting. So they let them have Aeroflot flights, which they stopped a long time ago, and they still have 7 Russians at the airport, even though there's no Russian flights. What are they doing? They're watching, and they have a station there, and the Russians have a research thing here on this, as well as the Chinese have a big building right here. And so Barentsburg you can go to. They used to deal just in rubles, but the Norwegians made them change. And you can go tour it, and then you have to leave. You can't spend the night. And the Russians are just there watching the Norwegians and just having a steak in the area. So this is from the old coal cars when they used to run coal down. They kept this thing going, you know, just as a relic of it. And this is the North Pole Hotel, where visiting scientists and all can stay. And I'm out here looking for my bird that escaped me that I really wanted to see, the beautiful ivory gull. Very few of them that are in Svalbard. In fact, they're not numerous globally. I think in the numbers they have for ivory gulls, 800 pairs in all of Svalbard. And they told me that this field here was a very good spot for ivory gulls. And I looked and looked and looked, but couldn't find one. And they were spotted by people, and I'll tell the story later about, but I never got to see. And this is Roald Amundsen, who died actually trying to rescue someone that went up in a hot air balloon and crashed. And he was one of the people trying to get to the North Pole. So they have a statue because he was based there. The closer you could get up north, that's why he used that area. And this is a harbor seal that Carol took a picture of. One of the only 2 we saw. We saw the bearded seal too, even though there's 5 species of seals that you can find there. So before we get to the icebergs that you're going to see and their offspring, I call them, Svalbard has over 2,100 glaciers. One that fronts the North Outland coast, which I showed you, that big island, stretches 100 miles from its ice cap all the way along the sea for 100 miles. Icebergs are 100% freshwater from snowfall. It gets compressed so that when it's so compressed in ice over thousands, even 10,000s of years, that they reflect the blue light in the color things of our light system, of the system. And so they calve with the largest chunk called icebergs, 90% of which are underwater. Some of these icebergs can be the size of almost Delaware. They're in the Antarctic. They can be enormous, but bergy bits are more common, and they're less than 17 feet generally above water, and typically the size of a small house. Growlers are the size of a large pickup truck, because when the old wooden ships used to hit it, the wood would growl. And then brash ice is the broken up stuff that you'll see. Packed ice is when all of these types of ice concentrate together into mats, and they have ratings from 1 to 10. And when you're at a 10, only a military style icebreaker could ever get through. So the densities can block navigation, and it did on our trip. And you'll see some pack ice that we went through. So this is one of the 14th of July glacier, named after the Duke of Monaco because of the 14th of July revolution. And you can see the size that we're in of these zodiacs that go, and you have to stay a good distance, because if this calves, there have been cases where a tourist boat, not the Zodiac, but the actual vessel, was so big, the waves, like a tidal wave, came over the deck and actually swept a couple people overboard. So you have to stay away from these the glaciers. These are enormous and incredible things that make you feel so humble when you're around there. And you're always looking for birds, seals, whales. And then this is a pack ice that you'll see. So they're not bergy bits. They're not icebergs, but it's just the pack ice. And there's enough, this isn't that thick for a ship, especially a polar class 6 to get through. And so this one would be one of those Bergie bits because it is that big. It's the size of a house. But look at this nature's artwork. It's just incredible. It's like, you know, the hand of God carving this. This one I love. You see the bird? Look at the feather, the wings. What species? I don't know, but it's pretty cool. So this would be what's called the brash ice, just the little pieces and chunks. And there are Atlantic puffins. Carol and I have been lucky. We saw the 2 species in the Pacific very well. At nesting sites, we saw the horned puffin and the tufted puffin, and everybody loves puffins, I guess. I know my wife does. And so, as I said, the puffins, there are 10,000 pairs in Svalbard, and this is where they're nesting. They like to go into little crevices, just like I saw in Ireland. And they're the same species, of course, the ones we have in Maine and off the east coast of Canada. And then these are very common birds there. They call these Brunux guillemots, and we call them thick-billed Murres. And there are these are a very, very, very common species. We saw a lot of these almost every single day. And for these, there are 800,000 pairs in Svalbard alone, and some of the cliffs are just covered with them. This is the one that I showed just on the ice. These are black-legged kittiwakes, though. This is typical. There's no sand. There's no real beach. You know, it's rocky from the glacial things carving the landscape and the mountains. And the weather, people would ask, I'm sure, what was the weather like? What I would say is that it ranged from in the 20s, maybe the coldest in, you know, early morning, but you remember there's sun all the time. It might have been 24, and then it got up maybe to 52. But I would say typically, and as you move north, it's colder. You know, it would be maybe in the 30s, a low, and then you get into the 40s. But you're outdoors, there's wind. We saw snow while we were there. And the key is, like the Russians said, in Siberia, even in the winter, there's no such thing as bad weather, only bad clothing. And there's new long underwear that is incredibly good. It's very thin, and it's called thinsulate, 2 layers on the outside of silk, and then it has more of a thin flannel in the middle. And then your heavy pants, and then waterproof over that, waterproof pants, and then a heavy sweater, shirt, sweater, and then a waterproof jacket like you saw me wearing, and then waterproof. It has to be waterproof. If you get wet on that Zodiac, that's when frostbite can set in. And so there's the clothing right there. It takes a while. They provide you these muck boots that you use the entire time, and they are unbelievable. You don't slip. I don't know what they cost, but if you ever had to do any hiking in the muddy areas, because when you land on a Zodiac, you swing your feet into the ocean, into the Arctic Ocean, whether you call it the Greenland Sea or the Arctic Ocean or the Barents Sea. You are in cold water and you can't even feel it. I don't even wear shoes under this. I just have wool socks, and they are incredible. And you keep these on the whole time. We had walking sticks, and this life preserver is special. It's very heavy. It can actually inflate into a small raft, like something on an airplane. So you have to wear these, and it straps all the way under. So to get in, if you just started from your underwear in the morning to get all of this clothing on, you've got about a 10-minute exercise every time, and the same to get out of it. And these were some of the Svalbard reindeer we saw on this island. And this was actually a pink-fronted goose, which is the most plentiful, they said, with 40,000 pairs. But this is the only one, we only saw a few of these. So wherever they were wasn't where we were going. So this was the pink-footed goose, which was another lifer for me. And surprisingly, as I said, there's an incredible diversity of plant life, like 180 species of what you would call plants, the advanced plants. And these are just some of the beautiful plants that they had. One of the jokes is that Svalbard doesn't have any trees, but I was told, no, they do have trees. There are two trees, and one grows to be 11 inches. There's a dwarf tree, and another one gets to be about 7 inches. And so these are some of the beautiful plants that grow, that Carol took pictures of in Svalbard. So this is Leader Ford on the way north. You can see the giant glacier and the ice carvings. There's our ship. Strangely enough, the Texas Bar, I don't know why it was called the Texas Bar, but there's a famous hunter named Hillman Noyce who would live in there even in the winter. He had a bunch of them, and this one is still there. It was built in 1927. It's owned by the Sisselman. He's like I said, the governor, and it's still used by scientists and locals. They have to check with the Sisselman and get the clearance, and people can arrive by snowmobile. And to show you snowmobiling in the winter, you can even see some of the saxifrage here. The snowmobile in winter, this guy got a little bogged down. So we didn't take this picture, obviously, but this happens. And this is one of our typical hikes, getting up, and you can see kind of the weather at that time, and some of the beautiful saxifrage again growing. Then we go from the Zodiac into this beautiful, huge glacier that ran for well over a mile. It's called the Monaco Green. It was after the Duke of Monaco, who funded a lot of research in the early 1900s and actually came up there. So they name it after these people or former rulers. And you can see this is just us at the face of the glacier. I don't look so good there. I'm actually freezing. This was a really cold day. And I think the wind chill was into the teens, and it was wet too. And then you can see some of the brash ice as well as some of the ice flows we had to go through. And these are black lake kittiwakes. This is a black guillemot. They have big colonies of those as well. There are and this was a bearded seal, one of the two species we saw. And this is us busting through the ice to look for polar bears due north of the island. This was our first polar bear. The furthest north we got was about 640 miles because the ice pack was so thick from the south winds. The northern fulmar flying over the polar bear. Carol took all these pictures from the ship. We didn't do Zodiac landings here. The ice was too thick. So we came around, and now we're going to Kinvika. This is North Oslo that I talked about, the second biggest. It's all a wildlife preserve. And instead of doing Longyear being around Prince Karl's Fordland, this 52-mile long island, all the way here, all the way up over here, all the way here to Vatoya, which is really wild with walrus and no human habitation, walrus and birds, and as well as polar bears. We had to cut off and come through the strait, and we went to Barentsoya, through this strait, Edgeoya, and all the way around and up back here, and then into Longyearbyen after going into these places. So here's Carol, as we always say, she's enjoying her day at the beach. This was another one of the stations that they used to hunt from. It's more of the plants, just absolutely gorgeous that they can grow in this kind of climate. Just think of them surviving through the winter. Not flowering, obviously, but on the this is all tundra. And we did a cleanup day. We got these little buttons, if you can see it, clean up Svalbard. You didn't have to participate, but it's just the ubiquitous of plastic everywhere, even on this remote island. I even brought some of it home, a piece of rope and all from some fisherman, you know. And this Alcafellet Mountain of the Guillemots, it's called, with 60,000 pairs of thick-billed Murres on this peninsula. You can see them all just flying. These things will start bouncing down, bouncing down. It's a chance for the Arctic fox to get them. Polar bears would eat them too if they could get to them. So this is just their colony. Pretty amazing when you see this many. And this wasn't even a peak of the season. As I said, June is the absolute peak. So this is a glaucous gull that nest up here as well. And the glaucous gulls are predators. There's about 5,000 pairs, which is not a lot in all of Svalbard, but they like these cliffs too. And here's one in flight, and then it got one of the chicks of the thick-billed Murres. There's an Arctic fox on the prow. You can see what color, how dark they get in the summer. And they are after these birds all the time. There's food is sparse. And here's one of the other growths. They have algae and lichen growing. And of course, most of you know lichen is a term for a combination of two things. And I always remember the rhyme. Alice algae took a lichen to Freddy fungus. So there's a fungus and an algae combined to make the lichen, and the color is determined on what nutrients are in the air. So this one's a little pinkish. Another face of a glacier that are melting. Look at these peaks. They look like some kind of monuments, religious features in Thailand. Here's one of the thick-billed Murres. And then finally, our 6th day out, I got my #1 species that I wanted to see in Svalbard, my #2 in the world, wolverines #1. I got to see a walrus haul out. Walruses were hunted, like I said. They stopped the harvest in 1952. They speculate that there were 100,000 around Svalbard, King Carl's Land, Prince Franz Joseph Land, Russia, and Novaya Zembla that moved back and forth. 100,000 in 1600. Today, there might be 4,000. They still have not recovered. They're remarkable creatures. They spend 2/3 of their time in the sea diving. They can stay down as much as 37 minutes, and they turn down their body system. Their heartbeat goes way down. Their brain functions just enough to allow them to suck out the muscles, mainly the meat of clams, as well as mussel, oyster, shellfish. Some bigger walruses will eat birds and will take fish and other small critters. But their diet mainly is on the bottom, where they use their whiskers to sense out, where it's dark, sense out the mussels and clams. And believe it or not, you always wondered how they did this. When they've seen dead walrus and dissect them, they find no shell, because they have incredibly big mouths without teeth that have such suction, it sucks the meat right out of the shellfish. So they're all just laying there in their happy warmth and flatulence, trust me. And these are almost all males. For some reason, the females separate. They don't know whether it's because they're worried about predators coming to places when they have young, or whether they're afraid that the big males would roll over them, because a male can be up to 13 feet long and can weigh over 3,300 pounds. They're the second biggest seal, if you will, next to the southern elephant seals. And these creatures are so unusual. I could go on and on. They killed them for their meat, their blubber. They killed them, these fins, the feet were especially treasured. The hides were used, like I said, and traded all over Europe for the rope and the strength. The ivory actually was highly prized too for carving. It still is. They're still killing them in places. So they were really butchered. And Carol and I got to spend almost 2 hours with them. They knew how much I wanted to see them. They moved everybody for 20 minutes. By Norwegian regulation, you can't get within 200 feet. We found a Siberian log probably cut in Russia somewhere, could have been 200, 300 years ago. We sat there on the log and just got to observe them. It was just incredible. they were so lucky and happy. And you can see the bristle and then the mouth, you know, can't find any teeth. These are their teeth. In fact, the name of the Native Americans used for the Pacific ones in Alaska and the British Columbia is tooth walker. The teeth, they are used to pull themselves up on ice. They're used to dig down in the soil. They're used to, you know, if they have to fight themselves or fight other creatures off. When they get overheated, the only way they can either put their pinnipeds means feathery feet, their feet up in the area where they have blood vessels, or open their mouths, or they just go back in the water to cool off where it's 30-some degrees. Then we're on Edgeoya, one of those islands I showed you, the smaller one, where we spotted polar bears. And this was, we got into the zodiacs. So this is a mother, two-year-old cubs that are getting ready to leave her. And they found a dead walrus. They didn't kill it. You can see the one of the ivory tusk, and they don't want the gull to come in and share their meat. This is a very highly prized when they mainly eat seals, and they're not out on the ice, they're on land. And as I told you, there's very little to eat. There's not that many reindeer. They're probably not going to catch one, and they're certainly not going to catch an Arctic fox. And even if there were voles, that's not much of a meal and hard to catch for a polar bear. And you can see one of the tusks here of the walrus. This was a female that started moving towards them to share in the feast. And when she got there, she shows some submissiveness, but it didn't work. And she's collared for research, and you can see what happens. They're not going to let her share in this at all. And it's pretty clear that this could be a bloodletting. And finally, she backed off, showed submissiveness. By the time we never saw her get to share anything. So we're still doing the circumnavigation around this place, and we come back and go to the southern tip, which is called Sword Cap. Cap is the tip or cape, and that's the southernmost part of the main archipelago of Svalbard. And this was one of the most beautiful places. It was Sunday, and it was called Berga Butka and Hornsund. So sun, S-U-N-D, is a sound. And this was a very special place, and our days were ticking off to the end. And it was like going to church in a way of, you know, being in nature's cathedral. Just absolutely beautiful. There's more of the black-wake kittiwakes, and here's a dovekie. There they call them in Europe a little auk. And there's a lot of little auk. We only saw a few wherever they went after their main breeding time. There's dovekies, there's about 1 million pairs, 1 million pairs in Svalbard. We saw puffins right next to our zodiac. And here we are, the guides said to turn off the engines. They didn't want anybody to speak for 15 minutes and just contemplate being in such a wild, spectacular place, even though you're knowing global warming is causing major transformations in the Arctic, greater than any place on Earth, including Antarctica. And as you sit there, the only thing you can hear, because there wasn't any calving glaciers, was you can hear popping sounds. And what happens is when that ice gets in the water, the salt water, and starts to melt, it releases little bubbles of carbon dioxide, and it makes a popping sound in the water. It's just pretty amazing. It's the only sound we could hear. And I was getting ready to see my ivory gull when the guide said, there's an ivory gull over here, another guide, we went to see it. So we moved over, and instead we were distracted by incredible beluga whales, the white whale. They're smaller whales. They were ones of the first ones that were slaughtered. They didn't have to harpoon them or chase them down. They put nets up and caught them by the hundreds and thousands. And these are two of their young ones, one here and one spouting over here. And this is the mother and father. They like to fish close to shore and dive, even though the water's fairly deep there. And it's incredible that we got such a good shot. And be so close to beluga whales. Here we are busting through the ice as we continue back north to Longyearbyen. One of our hikes. And back on the ship. What a day that was. Carol and I are very happy because we're having a big barbecue on the outside on the deck, the first meal, and the only one we had outside, because you can see how we're dressed. It's cold, it's evening, and they had ribs, they had barbecue chicken, they had, oh my God, everything you could imagine, and they had music playing. So it was really a blast for us out there, where people were all in a good mood. And Pippa asked me to dance, and she could really dance. And finally, we had a ball. She was just so nice. The same ship goes to Antarctica in the well, our winter, their summer. It heads down to Antarctica. The captain loves it. He says it takes him 2 weeks from Holland, and there's not many tourists, and he just loves being at sea. And the guides all gave superlatives. That's why Carol and I booked a trip to Antarctica for last December that was canceled. She not only hurt her knee, but COVID canceled the trip. This is Adam, who I said he was in charge of the whole shebang of all of us. Then Belsun is another beautiful place. Like I said, these logs were probably cut in Siberia. You know, our Eurocentric views are so crazy. Like Spitsbergen was founded in Svalbard by Wilhelm Barents. Well, there probably were Russian white pomors, P-O-M-O-R-S there. They were probably in there in the 500 to 800 AD from northern Russia. The Vikings probably were there, and there's no sign of this to document it though. But these logs washed up somewhere in northern Siberia, very likely, because there's no trees in Svalbard, period, except those two little ones I talked about, the dwarf fir. And this place was filled with purple sandpipers. Purple sandpipers have major nesting areas up there, and they estimate 6,000 pairs on some of these areas. And so they were everywhere, and snow buntings were flying too. And Carol and I are enjoying another day at the beach. One of our last stops, and a very sad one. These are all the bones of a beluga whale station. And after you've seen the beluga whales and marvel at them, we missed them in Alaska. There was a watch where all the when I say native, all the residents of Alaska were all waiting in the Cook Inlet, and we were getting ready to go to our plane. We didn't get to see one, but everybody was waiting to see one of the white whales. And they slaughtered these by putting a net across. This is the whale bone of a bigger whale. And where we were hiking, there was a reminder. It was probably days ago, but these are polar bear prints. You don't want to cross that when they're there. This was one of the old slaughter stations on Pulpinton, which is Prince Karl's land, which is a long 52-mile island outside of Spitsbergen. This was our last day going out, and it's known for the walrus haul out. It's used as a weather station now, but they used to slaughter walruses here too. And the island is too narrow to go up the right side or the east side. So you go to the west side, you don't get to see the walruses, but they run walrus day trips from some vessels just for the day out there because it's a sure shot place. So we're all headed down, and you can see the glacier. This is just across the strait from the island. And there they are again. It's a small pod of Atlantic walruses. There's two populations, the Atlantic and the Pacific. They are different. The Atlantic may be 30,000, Pacific is larger in numbers. So my last day out on the sea, we got to see walrus again, which is very edifying. I love these critters. So, you know, the seals, the true seals are called pinnipeds, which was Latin for feathered feet. Another place that was used to slaughter them. So, ones I didn't see, that I wanted to is, number one was the ivory gull. I didn't see the male king eyre in this plumage or the common eider male. I didn't see the Ross's gull, and I didn't see the who's named after an Irishman, this Sabine's gull. But I did see the Sabine's gull in Delaware Bay. It was a really, really kind of historic moment bird-wise, and he was mixed in with other gulls. I would never pick them out, but there were a number of really good birds with good scopes, and I did see that species. And there was a Ross's gull down at Solomon's Island, remember, about 10 years ago that everybody was going to see. These two were spotted once on the trip, but it may have been when I was sleeping, but they joke about the Ross's gull. It's so rare to see those, but I really missed this one, and I wanted to see these, but maybe there's another time. This is not Carol's picture, but this is ideal in Svalbard. You got the beautiful rainbow right on a blue whale. This was $1 million picture. Like, it's not posed either. Like, I really like to see the largest creature on earth alive. And these whales were slaughtered. The slaughter was unbelievable what we did to them. After they wiped out ones in the inlets just about, and they had to go to sea and learn how to process the oil and meat and blubber at sea and melt it down. They then couldn't kill the big ones. But in 1905, after whaling was dying out, the Norwegian invented the exploding torpedo type thing that killed them, instead of the old spearing them that could shoot them and shoot and explode in them. So they could start taking the blue whales, the fin whales, the humpbacks, the big whales. And this led to a slaughter that quickly started depleting them into the 20s, until finally by the mid 50s, they just shut it down totally. But as I said, minke whales can be taken by them. And then, of course, there's the narwhal, where I would have really died for. You can see him in Canada too. But this creature is one of mythology, where this is what gave legend to the unicorn, that they actually believed there was such thing as a horse-like unicorn. And they were bringing back, the early adventurers there were bringing back the actual horns of the narwhal as proof that there were unicorns. And these were more valuable, 5 times more than gold. The Pope had one as a gift. Emirs in Asia, the leaders in Egypt, they would use them in parades. They would walk with them, almost like phallic symbols of this wealth and this enormity, that they actually had the horn of a unicorn. And it were believed, if you touched the cups of wine or drink, that they could detect poisons for the royalty and stuff. All these myths grew up until they got busted. Just like with the barnacle goose finding out that, hey, there is no unicorn. These were coming out of this narwhal. And then we're getting ready to say goodbye to Svalbard. And Wally the walrus says, thanks for visiting. Now go away and never come back again. And that's my story, and I'm sticking to it, and I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Unbelievable. I know I'll never get to experience this, and your wife's pictures and your dialogue just made me feel like I was there.
Well, thank you.
It's very nice, because you actually answered a couple questions I had, and one was what the weather was like, and about the climate change.
Yeah, you know, for real adventurers, you can go there, and when it's dark, you don't have to go there when it's pitch dark, 24 hours, but you can go there and see the aurora borealis. They have special trips, but you're not going to see a lot of critters during that time, going out to sea. But I'm sure they have a good 1 or 2 brew pubs in Longyearbyen, and they welcome new blood to talk to there. So I'm sure the people tell me they have a blast in winter. They all get together and socialize and do stuff, And if you can see this is one of the pins they gave me, isn't it? It's a really cool one. Like, we had one of our former symbol was the bufflehead, but now it's been changed to the osprey, but it's a beautiful snow bunting. Pretty cool. So any other questions?
How much does a trip like that cost?
You know, I have to remember, you have to give me a second. So, you know, you got the flights to get there, right? And so you can combine it with a European trip too, or do more birding in Norway and the fjords and all. But I think, if I'm not mistaken, we had a upgraded cabin. It wasn't the best, but it was a good cabin. And with all the expenses, I think it was in the order of about $10 or $12,000, somewhere in there, with flights and everything. I think it was about 12 grand. But remember,
Trip to Africa.
that's all your food. All your food. The only thing you had to pay for is your beer and wine. And they had a couple nights where it was on the captain, or, you know, they had champagne and whatever. But the meals were incredible. And then we had to pay for a hotel room. I'm including that in too. We stayed. One thing I left out: most people know Svalbard for one reason, and Longyearbyen. It's the world's seed vault. They have a cave under one of the mountains near where the coal mining occurs, and it's very deep and stays at a constant temperature. And they keep the seeds of every single plant they can find on Earth, just in case something happens or they go extinct. And so the little, when I say hotel, you would call it a hotel, but you got to understand it's just a little boxy thing with very small rooms. And it was called the vault. So we stayed in the vault, not the seed vault, but the hotel called the vault. We had to pay $210. We didn't get in till 3, and we were going to go out touring like at 9, you know, but they had an enormous breakfast. So anyway, yeah, it does cost that much for these cruises and all. The two downsides were, you know, the occupation of guides with rifles that took them away from being to interpret for us. And 2, that the guides, some of them didn't know birds, and some of the birds flying by quickly and that you saw, you know, they didn't all know birds well, and everything else was excellent. You don't get seasick. If you can take a winter birding around here, or pelagic trips out of Ocean City in the winter, you can take it. You just have to have the right clothes. It's not like, you know, you're going to be staying in the Caribbean. Other questions?
Nicely done. Very much appreciated, Gerald. And thank you for all your efforts on behalf of the Red Knot. This is Kurt Schwartz.
Oh yeah, still fighting the battle.
Yes, we are.
Anyone else?
No.
I would
Thank you.
encourage you, if you've got the time and money, it's a heck of a trip. And Norway is beautiful, and people are welcoming. You know, and another strange thing, I never got an answer. We were on that ship for 11 days, 11 nights. There was not one single Norwegian that we met working on it or traveling on it. It was very odd. And now there were people from all over Europe. There were people from, you know, like I said, the guides were from all over the world, and but there were no Norwegians. I could never figure it out. You know, I asked some people, and there was just no answer. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Really
It was
appreciate it.
All
It
right,
was wonderful, just wonderful.
thank you.
Good night.